glad to be here and to get the opportunity to present, let's say, a survey of some of the work that some colleagues of mine and myself have done in the last years on this topic. I start with trying to convince you or get you closer to the question. And actually the question is a very old one. It comes from a debate that two of the classical economists had, David Ricardo and Thomas Malthus. But by the way, you could also argue that the presentations, the last two presentations, go back to a very old question, because Malthus did write a lot about the limitations of resources on the one side and population growth on the other side. So it seems that some questions stay with us for a long time. Well, the debate I am referring to goes back to the debate about the so-called Corn Laws. And the Corn Laws, I would say, are the mother of every agriculture policy. It's just the most famous agriculture policy that ever was implemented. And it comes from the Napoleon War. And during the Napoleon War, the French had an export ban to UK, which were their enemies. And therefore, the English were not self-sufficient, so they brought a lot of marginal land into production. Then after the war, in the beginning of the 18th century, the French wanted to import grain again to England. But now there was this land in production which was not competitive at all. So they discussed about if they should introduce something like an import ban for French grain. And Ricardo was against it, and Malthus was in favor of it. He was talking about something that we are still very familiar with. He was talking about fair prices for farmers. This is important. The question is important in itself, but the question is also, or the circumstances are important because it leads to at least two important findings in economics. And one is the theory of rents that is also important for our work. So Ricardo showed if you introduce this policy, okay, so if you introduce an import ban, the price in England will be very high. So somebody benefits from it, and those who are benefiting are those who own the land of good quality. So a rent is created, okay? And the other important thing is that he clearly showed, and this is the starting point of what we call political economy, he showed that politics is always driven by economic interests. So basically it was the discussion. On the one side you had the landed aristocrats who got this rent from the import ban, and on the other side you had the rising industrial capitalist class who were interested in having low food prices so that they could pay low salaries to their people working in the plants. So basically this is what we are looking at. We are looking at if you introduce a policy, who gets the rent, okay? So since then, a lot of work, theoretical, empirical work has been done on this, and I tried to make, just show you some of the findings that have been discussed in the last 150 years or whatever, okay? So what we can say is it doesn't matter what kind of agricultural policy you introduce, you always create the rent, and somebody is capturing the rent. So, however, there is a difference between the policies that we introduce. So who gets the rent, or how large this rent is, basically is heterogeneous among different policies. So there's a difference if you support farmers through a support price, to an intervention price, the system that we had before, or through direct payments. And third, the same is true for sales prices, because sales prices are basically, what are you paying for land? What you're paying for land is the expected rents that you get over the years. So if there is a policy introduced and you think that the policy will exist, this will show up in the sales prices as well as in the rental prices. And the last thing is, and this is our starting point, the degree of capitalization. So how much the policy influences the price and how much of a rent is created, and if this rent goes to the farmers or if this rent goes to the landlords, basically is an empirical question, because it's not only, Ricardo thinking was that everything goes to the landlords, and that's not true either. So it depends, as I said before, it depends on the policy that we introduce, but it's a price support, the direct payments, but as we will see, it also depends on the way the policy is implemented in different countries. And I will show you that it's implemented in the same policy is implemented in very different ways in different countries of the EU. And it also depends on land market regulations. In some countries like France, the land markets are very strictly regulated. While in Germany, this is not the case. So in some countries you have regulations that a rental contract has to be for 9 years, at least. In other countries like Ireland, they still rent on a yearly basis. So this makes a difference. Now the structure and competition basically means how many people are supplying land, how many people are demanding land, is there a market power for sellers or for renters or whatever, price expectations, what do I expect, how will farm prices be in the future, but those are the expectations about if the policy stays for a long time or if the policy will be abolished. So basically it's an empirical question. This is what we try to answer here, or what we tried to answer in several papers. Basically, we concentrate on the effects of the common agricultural policy, and we looked at it for the rental prices as well as the sales prices. And you could also say we are interested that the main question is, does the money go to the people who own the land, or does the money go to the active farmer? So that's the question. So we concentrate on the last, well, it's not the last reform, the reform before, but I think I'm also able to say something about the last reform from our research and our empirical evidences from Bavaria, where I worked before I came here. Okay, just to give you some background for those who are not so familiar with the situation and the policy. In the last 30 years, we had two big reforms of the common agricultural policy. The first was the so-called McSherry reform in '92. And this is how much we spend on agriculture policy, so it's about 50 to 60 billion a year. So the first change was from a price support policy to area and animal payments. And what we see here is, that the way the expenditures changed. So here the red ones and the yellow ones are expenditures for prices like export subsidies. So with the first reform, we switched to direct payments, which we call coupled direct payments, because you can get these payments if you have a number of animals or if you have a number of acres that you farm. Okay? So these are all these blue payments. So we switched from this one to this one. And the second big reform, I don't think that the last one in 2013 is a very big reform. The second big reform was from Franz Fischler in 2003, introduced in 2005. And this is, we switched to what we call decouple payments. So for now, it's no longer necessary for farmers to actually grow something on the land. They just have to keep it in good agricultural condition. So this is what we now call single farm payments. Okay. So what does this mean, or what is this single farm payments? One of the big changes was, for the first time in the history of agricultural policy in all countries together, active farmers at the introduction got something that we call payment entitlements. It's like a bond that you would own. And for this bond, you can claim money every year. Okay? So if you farmed 50 hectares at the beginning of the system, you got 50 entitlements. Now, what is the value of this entitlement? And this is where the countries converge. So we have some countries, only a few like Slovenia, Croatia, and Malta, who introduced what we call a regional model. And a regional model means that we took together all the payments we had before the introduction, divided it by the hectares, and this determined the value of each entitlement. So what is important is that the value of the entitlement, every entitlement has the same value. Okay? So then there is the historical model, which was introduced by most of the countries. So what you got as an entitlement did not depend on the region, but it depended on what you got before as a farm. Okay? So we used the payments before the introduction, divided it by the hectares that you farmed, and this gave the value of each entitlement. Okay? And there is something in between, as the name says, which we call the hybrid model. And there is a static hybrid model, which is basically a mixture. So some part of the value of the entitlement is based on this, and some part is based on this. And we have something that we call a dynamic, and that's interesting because it's introduced in Germany, and that's where we have the data from. And dynamic means that we start from a hybrid, or in Germany we start from something there, but over time we converge to a regional model. So basically, what happens if it started in 2005 and the convergence started in 2009 and was completed in 2013. So what it means, if you at the beginning had 50 entitlements and each entitlement had 500 euros as value, so you could claim 25,000 each year, but over time the value of the entitlement would decrease to 354. But if you had a low entitlement value, like farmers on grassland at that time, it would increase over time. So in the end, every farmer gets the same amount of money for 1 hectare. What was not the beginning, what was not the same at the starting point. Okay, so the most important thing to understand in this system is the linkage between the entitlement and the land. You have 50 entitlements, but you just can claim the money if you have 50 hectares. Okay? You can own the hectares, you can rent the hectares, but only the combination of these two things give you the money. Okay? So also, you can rent or sell the entitlements, so you can sell it to somebody. Okay? You, as I said before, you can choose if you you can plant any crop, so you can plant nothing. You just have to keep the land in good agricultural condition. So soon after this was introduced, some people started to analyze this theoretically, and they came up with some conclusions from this system. First of all, we call them decouple payments. They are decoupled in regard to production. Okay? So they should not have an influence on what you produce, but they will have an influence on the value of the land. They will capitalize into the land price to some extent. Why? Because we have this connection here, basically. Okay? You need the land. Okay? So, second, how much it does capitalize into or how much it does influence the price of the land basically depends on how much of eligible area we have. So let's say how much land we have with which you can claim the money, and how much entitlements are distributed. So theoretically, if we would have more entitlements, let's say 1 million entitlements, but only 800,000 hectares, you need the hectares to claim the money, right? Therefore, there would be a competition from this 1 million entitlement holders for the land, and they would pay a higher price for the land. Okay? If it is the other way around, there would be no capitalization, no influence. Empirically or in reality, I think it would depend on the ratio between these two things. It's not the 0-1 decision in reality. And the last thing that those people found is that the regional, if you have the regional model with the payments the same for every farmer, it would have a stronger influence on the prices than the hybrid and even the historical model. So these are the theoretical results. And now let's switch, because I think from this understanding we can also say something about the reform that was introduced in 2013 and started in 2015. So what we had before is this single farm payment. So everything was one big payment. So what we have now is something that we call a basic payment, okay? And that's only part of it. And in addition, you can get green payments if you fulfill some environmental requirements. By the way, only 70% of the farmers in Austria have to fulfill additional requirements. So the question is, how much does it actually benefit the environment? And then you have some additional payments, okay? And also this looks very fancy and looks like it would be something very different. But I think the basic thing is, to get the money, to get the basic payments, you still need 1 hectare of farmland, right? And to get the other kind of payments, you need the basic payments, right? Therefore, this connection between land on the one side and the entitlements on the other side is the same as before, I would argue, okay? Another important thing is that over time, those countries which started with the historical model, with different entitlement values for each farmer, have to converge to the regional model over time. And this also has an influence on the capitalization of the payments. Okay, just to give you some numbers. So this is the ratio between activated entitlements and the land that is available with which you can claim the money of these entitlements. So for some countries it's close to 100. Okay? For Greece it's 145, basically, meaning there are much more, they claim much more entitlements that they have land available. How this is possible, I don't know. But it's Greece. So for other countries it's lower. Okay? So especially the countries with the hybrid model like Finland, Sweden and Germany are close to 100%, meaning basically there is as many entitlements as land available. Okay? And this would point in a direction that we have a high capitalization. Another thing that is important to understand is that the land sales market, the farm land sales market is very tight. So for many countries, the amount of land that is sold every year is lower than 1% agricultural land. For Austria, it's 0.2%, meaning it takes 500 years that every plot is sold once. Okay? So the sales market is tight, so the rental market is important. Now, for some countries it's higher, but the Netherlands, I think that the reason is that you sell your land to your kids. So therefore we have a higher percentage there. So anyway, so we look at the rental market and we see that in some countries the amount of rent that is the amount of land that is rented is very high. So, for example, in France, 84% of the land that is farmed by farmers actually is rented land. Okay? The same is true for Germany, not to this extent, but we look at Bavaria. So we are looking at something like Germany 60 to 70%, in Bavaria it's 50%. In Austria it's about 1/3, 35%. Here it's 31%. Depends on which source you believe. Anyway, the point is that the rental market is the important market anyway. So just to give you an idea what this means. So for Germany, farm expenditures for land rentals, how much farmers spend it on renting land was 2.4 billion in 2013. So to get this in some relation to another thing is, it's 45% of all the direct payments that the farmers received. Okay? Or you could say it's 39% of the agriculture sector total added value. So it's a big number, at least for countries with a high rental rate. Okay, this is just two more for Bavaria. That's the rental rate, about 60% for Germany, that's for Bavaria. It's lower, but it's increasing over time. And these are the rental rates, how much you pay for 1 hectare in euros. And very interesting, it increased in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. I think that's very easy to explain because we supported the farmers with the price, and with growing productivity, land becomes more valuable. Then it was rather stable in the time where we had Decouple payments. Well, you get 350 euros for every hectare, doesn't matter how much you grow on it. So the value of the land shouldn't change much. But what we see is that the rental rates increased a lot in the last years. And you see this especially in this picture here, which only takes the new contracts. Okay? This is on average, but contracts can last for 10 years. This is the new contracts. And what we see is from 2004-05, the rental rates for cropland, for total and grassland increased in Bavaria considerably. Okay. So the empirical evidence I want to show you is based on 3 studies, and this just gives me an opportunity to mention my co-authors, Paul Feichtinger, Alan Kleiber, and Stan Thompson. Just very, very briefly, I don't go into any methodological stuff here, just want to present the results and the databases. So what we have for the rental rates is we have bookkeeping data from Bavaria. We have data from 2005 to 2011, 3,000 farms each year. That gives us about 18,000 observations. Okay, I think we can skip this. What we actually did, I show you some of the descriptive statistics just to give you an idea. So the average rental rate was 250 euros. That's the market revenues on average. So the payments on average, the single farm payments were 350 euros. And then we included in our regressions also the agri-environmental payments, which was 60 euro per farm on average, and payments for disadvantaged areas, which was about 40 on average. But of course, a lot of farms did not get anything, so we have a 0 here. And then we have some other covariates which try to describe the quality of the land or what is planted on the land. So here are the results. For every additional single farm payment, for every additional euro that we give to farmers, 35 cents, or this will increase the price by 35 cents. Basically saying 35 cents go to the owner of the land rather than to the active farmer. Okay? However, we find considerable regional differences from almost 0 to 56 cents. Okay? And we're not completely sure why this happens. It has to do with the quality of land, but we have not disentangled this to the full extent. We also find very strong capitalization of these less favored area payments, even higher than for single farm payments. We don't find much of this for agri-environmental payments, which makes a lot of sense because agri-environmental payments are paid for some additional effort that the farmer is doing. And we find, and this is the nice thing about having data from Bavaria or from Germany, because they switched from a historical model to a regional model over time. And now in 2019, every country has to stick to the regional model. So we can, from this, we can refer what will happen if we introduce, or if all the countries switch from a historical to a regional model. So what we find in one of our studies is that the capitalization will increase with switching from a historical to regional model as theory would predict. So we find then it increased from 35 to 56 cents in the last years for Germany, for Bavaria. Okay, the other data that we have is on land sales prices, and this is, I really like the data because it's almost all the transactions that have been taking place, sales of agricultural land for Bavaria for 2 specific years, 2001 and 2007. And we got this data by coincidence. Somebody from the tax office gave it to us, and I think he was not allowed to do it. But we just took it. I think it should be private data, but anyhow, this is. So we have about, and you see how tight the market is, right? In every year, there are only 3,500 sales transactions. I mean, that doesn't include inheritance. That doesn't include if you give the land over to your kids, but actually transactions, okay? And here you just see where we have points, that's Bavaria, where we have points. So you see in some areas that they are in a particular year, there's not even one sale, okay? So this is the descriptive statistics. So the average sales price in our data is 22,000 euros per hectare. We know who was, if the public, let's say the municipality sold, or were the seller, or if it was a private, we have some indication of the soil quality, and that's important because the rent is also created by the soil quality. We know the size of the transacted plot, and then we have to we calculate the distance to the next urban center, we calculate the direct payments, but we don't have it for the transactions, so we have to take the averages of the municipality anyway. So we have some covariates, and that's maybe the only thing that is interesting, we do a spatial econometric model, basically means that the sales price in one municipality will influence the sales price in another municipality. So these are our results. Basically what we find is what you expect. Land prices are significantly influenced by land productivity, by the land market structure, how many sellers or how big the rental market is, by non-agriculture factors like urban pressure. Spatial dependency is significant, but for our thing, the most important thing, if we would decrease direct payments, for example, by 50 euros, we will decrease land sales prices on average by 850 euros in 2007 and 280 euros in 2001. And our conclusion from this is that with the introduction of this new system, the capitalization effect increased over time. You could say that's probably not as much, but of course with sales prices it's not as direct, because you have to form an expectation how long the agricultural policy will exist, right? So, but land quality stays forever. I mean, if you take care of the land, of course. So my conclusions from all this are decoupled payments or decoupled direct payments of the common agricultural policy have a strong is not a very scientific term. I would call it strong, but that's relative. Have a strong influence on land rental and sales prices. What we observe is that the degree of capitalization, at least for our data, increased over time. It increased from the switch from area and animal payments to the coupled payments, to the decoupled payments, and we would forecast that it will increase with the new system and the regionalization of the payments. Okay? The degree, however, the degree of capitalization may vary considerably regionally. What we find in our data, basically it's higher on good quality land. Some people find other things here I have to mention. Well, and then given the different systems that we have in all these different countries, it might be, and given the different ratios between eligible area and entitlements that I showed you, this might, what we found for Bavaria might be different for other countries. But this is also probably a problem because it changes the cost of farming in different areas in Europe. Okay. Thank you very much for your attention.